Number 2, switching gears. This quote has hung in my office for 9, maybe 10 years. The next generation product almost never comes from the previous generation. The next generation product almost never comes from the previous generation. This is from Al Reese's book, Focus. It's not a Christian book. It's a business book that we read. We spent almost a year in this book as a staff. I highly recommend it. It's been out for a long time. It's a marketing book, but it's on focus. And in there, this is from a longer quote, but he says the next generation product, and he's talking about products. And his point is this: the next thing that's going to capture the imagination and fascination of the consumer, the next thing is going to come from the next generation. It's not going to come from the previous generation. So in my notes, I wrote this down. This is why what some of you are doing is far more important than what we're doing. Because you're 25 years old and you're messing with ministry around the edges, and you don't have 1,000 people, but you are figuring out and have figured out the next generation of what ministry is going to look like. I hate to break it to me, I'm not going to figure that out. In fact, I'm going to look at what you're doing and going, that's not going to work. First time I saw somebody texting, I thought, who is going to do that? And then I finally learned, and I've got staffed at Twitter now. And just as I was about to say, that's really probably going to catch on, and I'll be doing it in a few years too, right? Because my generation, and I'm not that old, and a lot of your generation, look, we're not going to figure out what's next. But here's what we know, because we've been around long enough to know, something's next. And chances are the next generation's going to figure it out, which means those of us that are in my generation, we have a responsibility to the next generation. And see, when I did, and many of you have this experience, and some of you in youth ministry are having it right now. When I was a youth pastor, I thought I knew what was next, and everybody told me I was crazy. And I thought I knew what was next. And we had a deacons meeting to decide that it wasn't next. Honestly, there was a deacons meeting, and I was invited, and they had a meeting about what I thought was next, and they all agreed, it ain't next. It ain't happening. And I just remember being so frustrated. And one of the reasons I'm happy to have had that experience is I have to just close my mouth sometimes and just gear back and remember, Andy, somewhere on the fringes of maybe this organization, somewhere in the fringes of church world, somebody's figuring out what's next. And Andy, you have the choice. You can fight it or you can fund it. You can fight it, and a few years now go, you are kidding, that caught on? Or you can fund it and say, you know what, I wasn't smart enough to think about it, but I had a big church with a bunch of resources, and we took a risk and we funded it, and we lost some money. But you know what? Those leaders were able to go further, faster, because those of us who don't have great ideas anymore, we had all the resources. And we were smart enough not to do to the next generation what the previous generation did to some of us. Right? That's the way, okay. Thanks, but okay, you go ahead and clap. It's just kind of, yeah, okay, I'm sorry. I know, this is exciting. I know, I'm with you. I'm not trying to say it's not good to clap. Okay, sorry, just felt a little weird. Okay, so, and let me say this too. If you're 25 years old, enjoy your day in the sun. I'm serious. Just eat it up. Love it. Enjoy looking at people like me or people older than you and going, they don't get it. Just soak it up. And one day, you're going to be 45. And you're going to be looking at 25-year-olds going, oh. And I just hope, you know what I hope for you? I hope you are currently in an environment where the 45-year-olds and the 55-year-olds come up to you and say, son, I don't understand it, I don't like it, and I don't get it, but we're going to fund it. If you think that's next, I'm smart enough to know that the next generation of ministry ain't coming from the previous generation. And I'm going to leverage my influence with the people my age in this organization to give you freedom. And if you screw up and if you embarrass me and you lose money, you come on in. We'll pray about it and we'll figure out what we're going to do next. Because if I'm going to have a legacy, my legacy as a leader is not going to be, I rained on everybody's parade because I thought my parade was the only parade in town and they finally had a funeral for me and they were glad I was gone. I want my legacy, and you two do. We want our legacy to be, oh my gosh, they got behind some of the craziest, most radical, most expensive, most out there ideas in the world, and 8 out of 10 of them were a total failure. But I'll tell you one thing about her, I'll tell you one thing about him. They were forward-thinking leaders that were so committed to God's kingdom, they were willing to risk failure, they were willing to risk their reputation, they were willing to risk their own legacy, they were willing to risk everything for the sake of reaching a generation generation that nobody else was reaching because they were smart enough to know that the next generation ideas are not coming from the previous generation. That's why you and I have got to pay attention to student ministry, because whether we like it or not, what's happening right now in student ministry is going to happen in big church one day. If you don't believe me, take a look. Right? When I was in student ministry, we had a screen and a projector. And we were like so happy. And remember, some of you have been there, and the adults would come stand in the back of the student ministry thing going, boy, I wish big church was like this. Little did I know one day it would be, you know? It's not because I'm smart. It's just because that's the way the world works. So guys, hey, give your student ministry more rope. Yeah, they're going to make mistakes. They're going to break things and screw things up. I guarantee you they are. I promise they are. But hey, that's okay. You can be so careful you're behind. You can be so cautious you're irrelevant. If you're not going to get it perfect, so if you're going to lean one way or the other, let's just remember, Al Reese is right. The next generation product almost never comes from the previous generation. It comes from the next generation. You need to create somewhere in your organization, if you can, the fertile soil for the next generation of ministry, the next generation to pop up. Here's the takeaway. Be a student, not a critic. Be a student, not a critic. You need to be a student of Emergent. You need to be a student of House Church. You need to be a student of megachurch. Some of you are here and you had to take a deep breath and you've held your nose for 2.5 days because you're in a megachurch. Because you just don't like megachurch. And that's okay, but you know what? You're here. You've become a student. Be a student, not a critic. I'll never forget, because I'm old enough to remember this. Some of you, this is irrelevant, but I remember when Bill Hybels and Willow Creek first came crashing onto the scenes, and I'm Southern Baptist. This isn't Southern Baptist Church, but I was raised Southern Baptist, and I guess you always got some of it in you. And so, which is all right. I really am very grateful for my heritage. And I remember when he first came on the scenes, I can still remember the big Southern Baptist gurus, how critical they were. I mean, they weren't willing to learn anything. They wouldn't go. They wouldn't attend the conference. They wouldn't listen to the CDs. They wouldn't listen to the tapes. They would hear bits and pieces of something and say, well, I hear they don't give an invitation. Like, what else do you know? That's all I know. They don't give an invitation. So you're going to write the whole thing off. And they would hear rumors, and they would put all the bits and pieces together and come up with a perspective. And you know what happened? Come on, what happened? All the middle-aged guys and up, I don't know about that. All the young guys would kind of shake their head in front of the old guys, and then they ran out and copied everything Bill Hybels did. Right? And then what happens? The older generation, they just become irrelevant because they're just critics, and they never learned anything, most of them. Let's not do that. When something new comes on the scene, before you criticize, become a student. Read. Be open. The only non-negotiable thing, honestly, and again, this is just my opinion. In fact, this whole talk is pretty much just my opinion. So, the only real non-negotiable when it comes right down to it is this. Jesus said it. You read it for yourself and read it in this context. Jesus was talking to the disciples, and he said, and this is a question you can't ask. Only Jesus could ask this question. He said, guys, who do people say I am? What's the word on the street about me? Try that sometime. Anyway, only Jesus could do that. And they said, and this is cool, they all believe in reincarnation. We think you're John the Baptist, some think you're John the Baptist, some think you're Elisha. Then you know this passage. Jesus said, okay, well, who do you think I am? You've seen all this stuff. Tell me who I am. I'm telling you, this little piece of scripture is bigger than we give it credit. And Peter said, I'll tell you who I think you are. I think you're the Christ, the Son of the living God. And then Jesus made a very, very important statement. He said, Peter, on this, I'm going to build the whole thing. That's it. Now, Catholics say it's Peter, but here's how we know what Jesus meant. The way you know what Jesus meant is by what happened. And the thing that holds the church together all over the world is this statement, that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God. Everything else we can argue about. Everything else we might need to debate. But the thing that holds it all together is Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God. And as long as that is what a person is willing to die for, be open to what they're doing, because the next generation of effective ministry is not coming from the previous generation. Be a student, not a critic. Once you're a student, then you can become a critic.